Good afternoon and welcome to B-Sides Las Vegas. This talk is entitled Cyber Threat Intel and APTs 101. We'd like to thank our sponsors, especially the Inner Circle sponsors, Critical Stack and Valeo Mail, and our stellar sponsors, Amazon, BlackBerry, and Cylance. Okay, dokie. Just a couple of other things. If you could please put your phone on silent. And at the end of the talk, there'll be 10 minutes for questions. Just please make an orderly line over here. Thank you, and I'll leave it with you guys.
All right, thanks. All right, welcome everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear us. So we're pretty excited to present here today. I've spoken at a couple other B-sides, but never as officially a DoD representative. So this is pretty exciting for me. So I'm John Stoner. I'm the Chief of Analytics in one of the directorates that we have at DC3, which is DICE, which in the DoD parlance, we put an acronym in an acronym. That stands for DoD DIB Collaborative Information Sharing Environment, but that's not important.
And I am Ronnie Obenhaus. I am actually his deputy. So there's no one man in the shop right now. We're all out here.
Right. So I'm sure it's fine. So this is a quick agenda today. We have a couple introductory slides. I'm going to go through them very fast, but I had to include them into this deck. And then we're going to dive into cyber threat intel a little bit about some concepts related to that. And this whole presentation is really geared for people who don't have a lot of background in cyber threat intelligence. If you are an expert, feel free to nitpick and ask us really tough questions later at the end. But that's really the audience is for somebody who this is probably not your main area of expertise. So again, we're from the DoD Cyber Crime Center. We're one of 7 federal cyber centers. We're probably the smallest. We have about 520 people total. It's an interesting organization. We have about 75% contractors at DC3. And across the whole organization, there's a number of mission efforts. So there's quite a lot that's done in support of law enforcement, LE, counterintelligence, CI, obviously cybersecurity, or else it would be weird that we're here, document and media exploitation, counterterrorism efforts, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's sort of like an overall, there's a lot of very different types of missions that DC3 contributes to. So there's 6 directorates at DC3, which is in Maryland, which I forgot to say. So we were a training academy. A lot of DoD, military, law enforcement have taken courses through Cyber Training Academy. We have TSD, or Technical Solutions. They're sort of like our DevOps people in-house. They actually will post some of what they're able to on GitHub as well. So there's some stuff out there from them that's open to anybody. We have the DoD Vulnerability Disclosure Program, which came out of Hack the Pentagon. That's the newest directorate. We have what we call AG, which is our analytic group. So they also do cyber analytics, but they are mostly focused on providing support to law enforcement and counterintelligence specifically. We have our forensics lab, which we work with quite a bit. I think our forensics lab is really good. Other DoD forensics labs send us their stuff, which I think that probably says something about the other labs. And then we're the defense industrial-based collaboration. So our titles, we're actually DICE, but that's a little bit confusing. So we work really closely with cleared defense contractors, CDCs, to share cyber threat information between all of them and to and with the government as well.
Yeah, so this is basically all the jargon that gives us that ability to do that. I'm not going to go into all of it because it's just a bunch of acronyms and a bunch of things that just give us, for lack of a better word, the authority to actually be that entity.
Right, so there's a few things I'll point out real quick without going over some of the DFARs and DODIs. So we have a voluntary program with over 650 companies, and that's really the core that we've built up over the 11.5 years that DICE has existed. And you can see we publish cyber reports, we share IOCs, those partners can submit forensics, PCAP, malware into our lab at no cost. So we think that this is a really good partnership between the DoD and CDCs, private companies that have contracts with the DoD that actually produces valuable cyber threat intelligence.
Yeah, so The way it works actually is exactly how he said, right? So when we first formed up, DICE formed about 11 years ago. And at first, it was very difficult to get the companies to actually submit anything to us. So we were actually giving them government-sourced indicators. So we do that through one of our products, the threat information product. But we recently got some analysis that said about 72% of the indicators that we provide out are ranked kind of like a 7 or higher, which is, it's a scale of like 7 through 9, some proprietary scale. So we actually think that we're sharing very good information with them. But this kind of wheel of optimism that I call it is we give them the indicators, they see them on their networks, then they report that back into us. We scrub that of their information, anonymize it, put it back out to the rest of the partnership. As John mentioned, there's about 650 companies. So none of them want any of the others to know that they got popped. Right, so we have to anonymize that information and then put the IOCs and stuff back out. Then we go into some longer form reports, that'll kind of give them some threat activity that's going on so they know what's happening. And then that might guide into some targeting stuff, so we can kind of give them a longer form paper of what's actually happening, who's targeting them, and then maybe that leads into government scanning their network, saying, oh, well, they're targeting that, we do business with them, let's scan our networks, and then more indicators come out of that. So it gives us this kind of wheel of optimism.
And the core focus for our operations are really on advanced persistent threats. So we're going to say APTs quite a lot in this. So we're really interested in understanding what the advanced persistent threats are doing, how they've evolved their tactics, techniques, and procedures, their TTPs. So just keep that in mind that we do get cybercrime and ransomware reported into us, and we'll do some contextual analysis and supplemental analysis on that. But the core product that we're focused on is ensuring that those partner companies have the TTPs of APTs, because that's the most significant threat to those companies that partner with us. We offer a number of different services for our companies. We have every 6 months a technical conference, which draws about 200 people. We have analyst-to-analyst meetings where we can really get into the weeds about things that company may be seeing on the network or questions they have about a particular APT, or it may not be that far in the weeds. They may not really understand how they would perform analysis to understand which APTs may be posing a risk. So we can have that at as in-depth a level conversation as they want. We can also talk to their executives or senior leadership, C-suite level personnel. And we have a variety of threat products as well, some of that's very quick turnaround. Our core product is when we get an incident in, we try to respond out with contextual information within 72 hours. We have other product lines that can take us up to 30 days to write. That's malware that's been submitted to the lab. We get the lab malware report back, and we try to ensure that that gets translated into something an analyst will understand and find useful. So that's just sort of the introduction, so you have some better idea of who we are and what we're focused on. And we're going to dive now into the cyber threat intelligence portion. So I present this slide at some of my other talks as well, because we're really talking about a very specific field within a fairly specific job category already. So we have people on our team who may have some background in some other areas, but at the end of the day, everybody on our team, which is about 35 analysts, really is a cyber threat intelligence analyst. Like that's the title that I use. We're called different things. There's not one, we might be a security analyst somewhere and doing some of this kind of work, but that's really what we're talking about as we're going to go through this. So we're not truly forensics people. We might have some people on the team who do a little reversing, but we really rely on our forensics lab to do full malware reversing. We don't have DevOps people on our team. That's actually a whole nother directorate that does that for us. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the makeup and where our focus is. So this is where we really try to explain, what is it that we mean with cyber threat intelligence. A lot of people are going to describe cyber threat intelligence in a number of different ways. So if you ask about 6 of us, you're probably going to get 10 answers. So this is one way I like to kind of describe what it is that we're talking about with cyber threat intelligence. So there's one aspect of this which is mostly automated, right? It may be coming from some sort of whatever you have in your perimeter defense architecture, logs, heuristics, your firewall, your SIM alerts, and that is information and data. So in an intelligence background, like a normal US intelligence background, normally when you're talking about intelligence, we won't call it intelligence until humans have synthesized and looked at that data. So ML and AI are sometimes coming along to help with this, but for me, when I really talk about cyber threat intelligence, I want humans to have looked at that, ensured that it's accurate, there's not errors in there, because it's the human that also understands the risk. It should be the human that understands, is this information tied to requirements? Is this information that's relevant to this organization that I work for? It's still hard for computers to do that human analysis aspect on the data that they're getting. And really, at the end of the day, it's the human analysts in cyber threat intelligence that study attacker TTPs and should understand and be familiar with the current attacker TTPs and what the attacker is moving towards in the future, so they can hopefully stay abreast of the changes and evolutions that's taking place with the attacker TTPs.
Yeah, I also don't want to take away from operational intelligence, because there's a lot of companies out there that they just want the indicators because maybe they're not big enough to have the context of it, and they just want something to, I just want to throw something in my IDS and block it. So we can't take away from operational intelligence, but yeah.
Right, and a lot of organizations and companies are not going to be able to perform strategic intelligence themselves, right? That's why like half of the vendors out here sell some version of cyber threat intelligence, because most of your medium to smaller organizations are not going to have human cyber threat intelligence personnel. Your security analysts are going to be consuming that from some other external provider. So, if I had to define this, this is what I came up with for the first bullet, right? It's the output of the analysis. So when the human takes all of these data points, right, what we're talking about is that synthesized analysis at the end of it. From our perspective, we're really focused on advanced persistent threats. So this is colored because of the organization. Like when we talk about cyber threat intelligence, we mean nation-state associated actors. So we're not really spending a lot of time doing cyber threat intelligence analysis on ransomware, unless we think it's really tied to nation-state actors. And then even then, we're not going to spend a good deal of our time on that ransomware, as ransomware is mostly fixed with patching. The APTs that represent that sophisticated threat to the cleared defense contractors are where we spend most of our time. So that's what I think of when I'm talking about cyber threat intelligence. So one of the things that we also wanted to bring up in this, and this has been discussed pretty extensively across the 2 days in the higher ground tracks if you've been going, is the type of people that work in cyber threat analysis is very, we come from a lot of different backgrounds. We're varied people. And we don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but we wanted to bring this up because I think it's important to have that diversity in all of your teams that you have, but it's true also in cyber threat intelligence. So some of us come from an intelligence background and some of us don't. And some of us are veterans and some of us aren't veterans. And I think that that diversity is important to bring differing opinions when we're analyzing a problem.
Yeah, so that list that we have up there is actually because we know somebody in our shop that comes from each one of those fields.
Right. One of the best guys I know, he's not in cyber threat intel, he's now a pen tester. He pivoted from being an EMT to being a red teamer. So again, I just wanted to kind of point this out in this briefing that even within our 35-person team, we have all of these types of people basically working with us. So the other thing that I hear quite a lot is, we need cyber threat intelligence. Well, that's fantastic. Do you have a defensible architecture? Have you considered asset management? Do you patch systems? Because you need to start here at the bottom of this chart in architecture before you go buy basically anything the vendors, thank them for being here and helping make these events possible, but before you go buy cyber threat intelligence, you may need to do some things prior to that to be ready to make use of cyber threat intelligence. So we could give you IOCs, but if you don't have everything integrated to really make use of the IOCs, then you're kind of just wasting money, right? So I also just recently went through SANS 4578, and this is adapted from some content that other people have created as well, and I just want to call that out. I basically changed the slide a little bit, but I did not create this graphic. So if you have a defensible IT infrastructure, then you kind of move up to the next phase here, right? Now we're at passive defense. Now we're reacting to things that are alerting in our Network Operations Center or SOC, right? So now we're reactionary. Hey, but at least you know you're getting alerts and maybe doing something about them now at this phase, right? And then you move up this architecture chart, right? So now you may get to active defense. So now we're being more proactive. So this is probably the first phase where you're consuming some threat intelligence sources in order to be proactive. You hopefully have also done some risk analysis as an organization to understand the types of cyber threats that might affect you and that your organization cares about and wants to have information about those particular threats. And then after that, you get to where you may actually have intelligence threat personnel on your team. The other sort of variable here is that you may have cyber threat intelligence personnel that are mostly consuming outside cyber threat intelligence, or you may also have some cyber threat intelligence personnel looking at all of the data on your network and synthesizing and analyzing that as well, and that's really critical to do as well. You cannot just read OSINT reports and consider yourself, fully at the intelligence spectrum. Like, you need to be analyzing your network's own data against the risks and possible threats as well, in addition to consuming external cyber threat information. And then very few organizations, private or DoD, will be in that active hunting category. So there are a few. This is where you're really talking about red teaming. But if you really want to use your cyber threat intelligence to inform the red team, the term that's starting to be picked up is adversary emulation. So that red team should be informed by what the adversaries are doing that we're most concerned about, that we've determined we want to keep an eye on, that pose a risk, as opposed to the red team using whatever random hacking measures and ideas they have, which may still be valid, but that's two very different types of red team operations, right? There's one that's informed by the adversary and what the adversary does, and for instance, MITRE ATT&CK framework may be useful for this. And there's also just getting a red team that tries to hack into your network, which may have value as well, but those are two very different types of engagements.
Right. One thing that we always try to point out is if you're a company that makes rubber ducks, right, and there's an APT out there that only goes after wooden boats, then why are you trying to protect against wooden boats? You don't make wooden boats. You make rubber ducks. So you need to go and protect yourself from the APT that's after rubber ducks. All right, so I don't know how many people are familiar with the don't be a one pizza target. Has anybody ever heard that phrase before? All right, so what this actually alludes to is how fast an adversary can get into your network. It's basically the consumption of one pizza and a monster drink, and they're in. Now, as we slide up the scale, as you start getting better in these things, it's starting to take more pizzas and more energy drinks. Now, if you'll notice at the end, it's a lot of pizza and it's a lot of energy drink. But I do want to stress that that is a finite amount. There is no such thing as a completely protected network. You are just trying to make yourself so hard that they move to somebody else that's easier. And I know that sounds very selfish, but that's what we have to do.
Right. When we talk about the advanced persistent threat tactics that are available, even if you are active hunting, there's no such thing as zero risk. Zero risk doesn't work. If you work for an organization or CISO that believes zero risk exists, feel free to have us come talk to them, because maybe the government talking to them in that case would be useful, and we can kind of talk through that threat, and they can be like, oh, well, those guys also agreed with you. And you're like, yeah, I know. So this is the cyber kill chain. So this is patented, trademarked, whatever you call it, from Lockheed Martin. What most people don't know is it was developed by Lockheed Martin with analysts in DICE. So fun fact. So we're going to really explain in technical detail what this is all about, right, Ronnie?
No, we're not.
No.
All right, so we thought it would be a little easier to consume it via, is everyone familiar with the movie Ocean's 11? All right, so that movie actually kind of lines up with the cyber kill chain pretty well. So, all right, first stage is reconnaissance. All right, so in the movie, Danny Ocean, he's got to find, he's got to do recon, right? So he gets the plans to the vault, because that's what they're trying to get into, right? So just like an APT will run recon, maybe they scan your server, scan your network, maybe they just look on the server to find email addresses, things like that, right? They're just surfing for really easy information. In this case, they got the plans from, I don't know, City Hall or something is where they got them from. So that's recon, right?
So I always explain recon two ways as well, which may be helpful. I will often say that there's technical and non-technical reconnaissance. I'm not sure if those are the best semantics to use, but technical reconnaissance, can someone scan your network, do ping sweeps, whatever it is that's effective against your network, run a vulnerability scan against it, right? That's the technical side. And then there's the non-technical side, like, do you list all of your VP's email on the page about who we are? Convenient for advanced spear phishing from an APT, right? So there's technical and non-technical recon at this stage.
Right, and that leads us into the next phase, which is weaponization, right? That is where they are merely trying to find that vulnerability that they found by scanning, right? And they're trying to weaponize it. They're getting a payload. I don't know if many of you have heard of Metasploit. They'll go to Metasploit with that vulnerability and package something together. So in this case, maybe it's a PDF that they want to end up connecting to an email or something. Or maybe it's a resume that already exists out there that they put some malicious code in. But that's what we mean by weaponization. And in this case, in the movie, they are actually trying to get a briefcase into the vault, right? So they are trying to weaponize this briefcase with plastic explosives, actually, to blow open the vault.
And in terms of APTs, a couple of years ago, we would see 0 days. That used to be the big thing. All the talks were about 0 days. It was super cool. And now the APTs are like, if we just reuse all of our own malware and make it publicly available, that makes attribution really hard, which it does. So less 0 days, a lot more spear phishing, same adversary threat groups. Now the spear phishing is really good because they went on your who we are page, did some research, perhaps found a document that your organization created, downloaded that PDF, put some malware in it, then sent it back to all of your VPs or maybe some individual VPs or HR people, right? So again, there's a lot of different examples of weaponization, but this is really about the malware in most cases. That's really what we're talking about. That the adversary believes will be effective against some weakness they found on your system.
That leads us into the next phase, which is delivery. So that is actually delivering that payload to their target, right? In this case, the briefcase is inside that cart, and they're trying to get it to the vault, right? In another means, it could be, the email with a resume attached with a malicious link inside the email. Anything they can do to try to fool you into clicking it or opening it, but this is merely the delivery phase, right? Now, normally, the delivery phase involves them clicking on the document or the malicious link as well.
Right, I mean, there's other types of technical delivery. It could be like a redirect. According to Wired.com and completely unclassified information, if you're familiar with Stuxnet, that delivery mechanism, I'm just clarifying, that delivery mechanism is believed to have come from malware, which was on the Siemens technical control, right? And then that went into Natanz. So again, delivery can be, you need to understand your risks, right? Because delivery could be spear phishing, but it could be something more complicated that you haven't thought of yet either, that the adversary is trying to figure out.
Yeah, there was actually a cartoon we saw the other day where there was a B-52 bomber flying over and it just dropped a USB stick.
Yeah, it was very funny. It was very funny. Yeah, I'm going to work that into my next briefing under cyber war.
So the next phase, the next phase we have is exploitation. So, the technical definition of this is that's where they are executing the code on the system. Here, in this particular instance, they are exploiting the security guard's job or ability to do his job, right? So they're distracting him. He can't do his job. They're literally exploiting him, right? So, but in the means, this is the delivery has already happened. The document has already been opened. The link has already been clicked, whatever, and exploitation is now that code is being executed on a machine. Which leads us into our next phase, installation. So as we see here, cart is being escorted right into the vault. It is being installed. So same thing, right? Code executed. This is where the installation of the malware happens. I mean, there you go, right?
Right. So if you're at this stage from the victim perspective, you have failed at all the detection up to that for whatever reason, and that attacker has installed the first dropper, the first set of malware. It may be making calls out to download and install additional malware at this point. It may be installing other or using applications on the system that already exist on the victim network. But at this point, you're breached, and it's not good because you haven't detected it up to this point.
And that leads into the next phase of command and control. So in here, we see that he vampire taps the network, can get into the security camera feed. What command and control usually refers to once they have installed the malware is it's now going to beacon back to something that they control, whether it's, that's where it stops, or, if it's calling additional files to download or additional malware to download. Like John said, maybe the installation phase just was a dropper, and now they want to pull the real malware onto the system. So that's where command and control comes into play. One thing I do want to mention is we do this in a linear scale, but not all of these have to happen in this order. Sometimes attackers, maybe they go to Shodan and see, maybe they scan your system, they go to Shodan, oh, this is already done, or, it was reported that you already had a vulnerability, and they just look and say, oh, well, you haven't patched it yet. They can skip a lot of these steps and go right to it. And so we do it linearly because it's easy to digest, but these steps do not have to happen in this order, which is why I put this scene here, because this scene happens way earlier in the movie.
Right. Yeah. So in a lot of cases, there's a few things I'll note about command and control, is that depending on the sophistication and how that particular threat actor operates, in a lot of cases they have some general command and control TTP in and of itself. So a couple years ago, it would have been easier because the adversaries would keep reusing the same infrastructure, the same C2. They've determined that was bad, so now they will use a lot of VPSs or other exploited bots, essentially, to do some of the command and control. But in a lot of cases, that's going to be set up, and that adversary has some idea ahead of time of how they're going to handle the command and control, for this particular intrusion or this particular attempted intrusion. And then, a lot of that malware is going to beacon back out, as Ronnie said. So that may be something that's detectable. It depends on normally the sophistication and the means that threat actor takes to try to hide the command and control beaconing in the first place. Like, there are some threat actors who don't care if eventually you find out, and then there are some who go to great pains to obfuscate the fact that they're on your system. So there's a lot of variables that can happen at this stage as well.
Then we get to the final stage, which is actions on objectives. So for this one, the actions on objective was exfiltration of money, right? That's what they wanted. So, and if you've seen the movie, they succeeded. Spoiler alert for somebody who hasn't seen a 17-year-old movie. But normally, actions on objectives, so it can vary on what they want, right? Is it information they want to exfil? Is it just persistence that they want to establish? Like John said, some people don't care if you knew they were there. They just wanted information. It's a smash and grab, and they're out. Some people will obfuscate. That's a hard word. They will hide. And yeah, so this is really the one. So ransomware, right? Actions on objective would be just the encryption of all of your files. So it really depends on what their goal is, depends on what their actions on objective.
Right, and the cyber kill chain comes from the military community because it was just the kill chain before it was the cyber kill chain. So when we describe actions on objective, I mean, it's basically anything the adversary wants to do: deny, disrupt, degrade, destroy, delay, all sort of standard military terminology. So in some cases, with a very advanced adversary whose goal is to maintain, the ability to get into that network later, then their action on objective is to remain undetected. That may be the only action on objective, right? If it's ransomware, it's, we want you to pay the ransom. If it's a disgruntled former IT guy, I might just want to burn your system down because I hate you people, right? So again, at this point, that attacker, whoever it is, can do pretty much whatever they want on your system. So the other important thing about the cyber kill chain is I like this because it's simple, right? So for an organization or people that are sort of new to cyber threat intelligence, I don't necessarily recommend starting with MITRE ATT&CK because it's very complicated and in-depth, and it might not be where you want individually or as an organization to try to start understanding cyber threat intelligence. I love it for the level of in-depth, detailed analysis it can do, but that might not be the best place to necessarily start a cyber threat intel team or sort of, you know, individually begin to understand. So as you go through as a network defender as well, the earlier you detect the activity, the better, right? So if I can detect recon attempts, that's better than if I'm detecting installation, right? If I'm detecting installation, you have been breached, right? That is now an incident, and you probably need to go through incident response. So that's just another note I want to point out when we talk about the adversary actions in terms of the kill chain as well from a defender viewpoint. So this is another big one as well. So you got all these intel people, we hired them, we got them sitting somewhere, they're reading FireEye reports and working with the DoD, right? But they don't know what to do. No one has given them any direction. So I'm gonna analyze some APTs I find to be interesting then, right? So this is another really critical piece that doesn't get talked about. So if you have defensible architecture and now you have a SOC and you've got cyber threat intel people, they need to work with your risk personnel to understand what threats are we looking for. Are you getting the right kinds of data from our network to allow you to also do cyber threat intelligence analysis on our network artifacts, on our syslogs? Are we detecting heuristic or anomalous activity on our network that looks like a potential adversary or insider threat? Right, so your intel team, your cyber threat intel team has to have some requirements, and it can't be 50, right? Because you can't work against 50 requirements. Normally, each individual CTI analyst can work somewhere between 3 to 5 requirements at most. That's generally a realistic amount of requirements for, you know, a mid-level cyber threat intel person, depending, you know, on what other duties you have them assigned or doing as well.
Yeah, and this goes back to that rubber duck, wooden boat analogy, right? You know, why waste time on a priority that's not a priority, right? You know, I think 10, 15 years ago, the military was all about stop everything. And now they're finally waking up to, okay, we don't have to stop everything, we just have to stop the ones that are actively trying to get in.
Right, and you really need to understand, you know, what that organization or entity you work with or the company, you know, are you an aerospace company? Are you an energy company? Are you in finance, right? Because those generally have some different types of cyber threat actors, right? Well, everybody faces ransomware, but again, ransomware isn't necessarily a cyber threat intel problem because you probably should just patch stuff and back it up. That's an IT requirement, right? So again, moving beyond ransomware, you know, if there are certain APTs in the financial sector that are, you know, doing certain TTPs that are highly effective in advance, then you should probably be focusing on that APT and what the newest attacks are so that you can ensure you have visibility to cover the risk that your organization faces. So that's really what we're trying to stress here a lot is you can go buy all the cool stuff out there and go hire a bunch of people, but you also need to have some policy direction and some requirements as well.
All right, Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. How many people are familiar? Okay, so we have a couple out in the audience. All right, so this really, I want you to see, you know, we have hash values, IP addresses, domain names, you know, I'm not gonna read the other three. Then on the right side, we have trivial, easy, simple, annoying, challenging, and tough. So what that is actually saying is, as we go up, that's what we are doing for the adversary, right? So, you know, hash values. You know, how many are you familiar with what a hash is? Okay, so, all right. So when you plug hashes into your system and you're blocking it, well, that's trivial, right? It's trivial for the adversary too. But we don't want to not do it, you know, just because we are talking about APT, but there's a ton of people trying to get into your network at all times, and they're not as sophisticated, so they are using the same stuff.
Let me jump in and throw you completely off too.
Do it.
All right. So also, when we talk about advanced persistent threats, there's like a playing field of how good they are. I like to use the Olympic analogy. Everybody at the Olympics is really good, but not everyone is actually in gold medal contention, right? So there is like a small percentage of like really bad, scary APTs, and then there's some other ones that are bad, and then there's some other ones, and then I guess we'll call those APTs too because they're associated with nation states, right? But they're not really gold medal APTs. There really is a sliding scale in terms of sophistication for certain APTs. So yes, you should still block hash values because that may still, even for an APT, be more difficult for them to figure out that you've done that in change.
Right, so as we move from hash values, we get the IP addresses, right? So same thing. You know, it's easy for them to change because they're burning their infrastructure like crazy. You know, they're using virtual private servers, virtual private networks, you know, whatever. Same thing with domain names. They'll just sit there and just create domains like crazy. But you don't want to not block them, you know, if you find malicious stuff just because you don't want to be the guy that didn't block bad.com. Right? So
good example, by the way.
then we get into network and host artifacts, right? So is everyone familiar with what network and host artifacts are? So okay, so for those of you who are not familiar, that's stuff that's like left behind, right? So if an actor has gone into your network, so if they're in the network, stuff they leave behind, you know, maybe code from malware that they used, that's going to be your network artifact. Host artifacts are going to be stuff like registry keys that were created or maybe files that were created after they ran something. So if you start detecting that stuff, that's going to make it annoying for them because now they have to go change some of the stuff that they use because you're detecting it and you're not allowing those register values to be created, not allowing those files to be created, you know, and then we move up into tools because they're all just using tools, you know, so when you start actually seeing the tools that they're using and can detect those tools, now they have to go change the tools. Well, that's challenging because so we have our differing opinions on sophistication versus non-sophistication. There are some APT that are very sophisticated, that I would consider very sophisticated, but they're not writing their own stuff. They're just using it in a very sophisticated way, right?
So they're just reusing other developed tools, or that core APT team may be sharing a DevSecOps malware guy across multiple nation state actors. Yeah.
So if you start seeing that, now they have to go and either pay somebody to write a new tool or write their own tools again. You know, so now you're making it challenging. Now, the top level, TTPs, their tactics, their techniques, and their procedures. When you know what they're doing to get into your network or get into your computers, and you start blocking that stuff, well, now they have to change everything about themselves. Or, with the one pizza target thing, they just move to somebody else who hasn't gone onto that. And that's really what we're trying to get to. So that's where that pyramid of pain is doing. It sounds funny because it's a pyramid of pain, and as it goes up, it's harder for us to do because you have to track TTPs, you have to track their tools, and that's where you get cyber threat intel from. But it's also making it annoying, challenging, and tough for the adversary as well. And that's really what that pyramid of pain is trying to tell you is as you move up the scale, it's beneficial for you to move up the scale.
And when we're really talking about the more sophisticated adversaries and their TTPs, there's a ton of information that is available that is of generally pretty good quality. So again, MITRE ATT&CK was the briefing before us like 2 hours ago. But the MITRE ATT&CK, where they have very technical level mapped against certain nation state actors or APTs, is a good resource. And there's a lot of other commercial cyber threat intel that's really good as well. And you may be eligible to join certain federal or USG programs to get some of the TTPs as well. So again, if you don't have a cyber threat intel team, I mean, that's where the focus is. So a part of this is make sure you're ready to have and include cyber threat intel as well, right? So not every organization is at the level where they probably should be making that investment, but even if you're not, your security people can still have a better understanding of APTs from those same sources as well. So we have a couple examples here. We could like go over every, hundreds of APTs that have ever existed and or may possibly exist. We just highlighted a couple today. Again, this is for people that are not cyber threat intel people. So these are two I like to highlight. So there's a number of different OSINT names, open source intelligence OSINT names, that tend to get associated with each other. So there is some interesting debate on whether that's good or not to do that, because when you start associating activity clusters over a really long time period, some people will start to argue we shouldn't associate that because that may not really be the same adversary anymore, and it really depends on what your definition of attribution is. So just keep that in mind. If you really want to have that discussion later and buy me alcohol, that's fine. So APT-28 often goes by the name Cephasi and Fancy Bear. That group has probably been active since about 2007. They're Russian. Just for example, one clue that helped us, help the community determine this is probably Russian affiliated is the malware compile times line up nicely with UTC +4, which is the time zone in Moscow and St. Petersburg, right? So there's a lot of other things that go into that, but I found that to be particularly interesting because even the most sophisticated adversary, it's still someone behind a computer who hadn't thought, man, I better compile this in North Korea time zone to throw them off, right? I mean, it just didn't occur to these people to do that yet. Now it will because it's on the internet. So this group also used to probably use a number of zero-day vulnerabilities, but actually they've just gone back to spear phishing because, God, we haven't figured out how to stop that yet. And they're really good at spear phishing too, right? Because it's not the, congratulations, you won an Amazon gift card, and even Gmail can figure out that spam, right? It's really sophisticated, really targeted spear phishing, right? So APT-29 is sort of like their brother or their sister group, if you will. They also will be known by Cosmic Dukes or Cozy Bear, if you believe that it's all the same activity historically. So I would say that this is one of the most sophisticated one. These guys are both sort of like gold medal contenders, if you will. But I would say this guy is probably like the Michael Phelps of APTs. So they patch their malware. I can't even get network defenders to patch the servers, and this APT will literally patch their malware. Awesome. So that's what we're up against with some of these guys. They're also really good at obfuscation. They make heavy use of encryption as well. They make detection, once you are a victim, they make detecting them very difficult when they're on the network. So the other example we have up here is a probable Chinese associated one, and again, a number of OSINT names that most likely refer to the same activity group, Deep Panda, APT-19, Shell Crew, or Pink Panther. So they've been active for many years. If you believe press articles and a lot of other OSINT out there, they were probably behind the Anthem hack. They were probably behind the OPM hack as well. And they target healthcare, aerospace, and energy. Those are mostly the three areas that this particular APT has been associated with attacking. And their core focus is cyber espionage, right? So again, they're exfiltrating sensitive data, like the OPM hack, which we were a part of. Not that we hacked it, but like victims, just to be clear. Victims of that. I've pretty much been a victim of Anthem, OPM, Home Depot, pretty much everybody. So I assume they have a very large dossier on me.
So that leads us to what is the future and what does it look like? So if it was the military, it would look like that guy on the left, right? So they think if we can just throw money and guns at it, that's going to do it. But they're slowly coming around to the guy on the right, that we need this intelligence-driven analysis. We need to know their TTPs. And then, even then, you still have two camps that we find frustrating. You have the camp that's all about counterintelligence, and then you have the camp that's all about network defense. And those are competing ideologies. Counterintelligence just wants to watch all of it so they know what's happening. Network defense is like, no, just stop it. We don't want it to happen.
I didn't know we were going to have this discussion, but just while we're on the topic, let me just explain a little bit more about this concept. So there's obviously a lot of U.S. government or DoD entities. So you have FBI, all the MDCOs, so like Army Counterintelligence, AFOSI, NCIS, the real people, not the TV show. But they have a very broad mission and cyber is a part of their counterintelligence and law enforcement missions. So again, you get into situations where if an advanced persistent threat actor, has compromised a victim, they can open up a law enforcement or counterintelligence investigation, basically, and that doesn't necessarily lend itself to sharing information with network defenders to block the adversary, right? Those are competing requirements in most cases. So there's a lot of effort across DoD and USG, but even so, it's hard to sometimes synergize efforts because those core missions are not really in alignment with each other in a lot of cases, right? They may want to make sure we understand the adversary, and as you guys have seen, within the last couple months, the amount of indictments that come out from the Department of Justice has probably increased a little bit, and there's some debate as to the effectiveness of indicting people who will probably never set foot in a country where we can extradite them. But I mean, I certainly would not want to see, an adversary nation indict me. So like, I think perhaps there's some right effort there to indict particular hackers or threat actors. But back to the intelligence-driven network defense portion, right? That's, even if you get to this point, there's still not zero risk, right? And so you can even have very sophisticated cyber threat intelligence operations with priorities, analyzing data proactively, informing the occasional red team, adversary emulation, and you still won't have no risk. So this is just a quick overview of everything that we covered today. So we are happy to take questions for a few minutes. If we don't know the answer, we'll make something up. So
that's what I do best.
If you ask a really tough question, though, we'll require alcohol.
Where do you see network traffic behavior analysis type products in your pain points diagram?
Probably like in that host artifact / tools level. So how your organization is dealing with that heuristic analysis detection, it may also be tied into whether or not you have like an insider team, an insider threat team, right? Every entity and organization is going to be structured a little bit differently, but your cyber threat intel team should, be tied into the SOC and NOC and be tied in, like if you have insider threat teams, they should be tied into that as well, because there are not very clear delineations here in some of the information and who may detect what. So you would want those teams to have really good relationships with each other as well. But I would say like heuristic or anomalous activity, if I've understood the question right, I mean, if you're at that level that you're detecting that, you're pretty high up on that Bianco's pyramid of pain.
Can you talk about your no-touch policy?
About the what?
About a no-touch policy?
No-touch policy.
Limitations on interacting with APT infrastructure?
So talk about our policy with it, like DoD. So, okay, so at DC3, we are not part of the U.S. intelligence community. So we are cybersecurity. That is the entirety of our mission. So you're really asking me about other DoD entities a little bit. And I think some of the missions that you're referring to are really being highlighted by other agencies, including Cyber Command. I think individual DoD policies would say, like, if I have some other random, like the VA, their network defenders should not be more proactive, I think. Is that kind of what you're asking about?
More specifically, like, where's the gray line between where you can interact with their infrastructure, touch their stuff, pull down their stuff, interact with?
Normally with the DoD, that requires very specified authorizations to do that, right? Because really at that point, that very easily crosses into what most policies and directives will consider offensive. So that is not true for like private cyber threat intelligence companies, which is why sometimes they have really excellent information in an OSINT format. Certainly, there would be DoD organizations that do perform that type of pull down in information. I don't know if I have a better way to answer your question. You've asked a tough one. You definitely owe me alcohol. Any other easier questions? No? Go ahead.
How does a CDI program extend to third-party environments?
To your company's third-party providers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really going to depend on your policies and the way you want to have it set up. So, I mean, for most private companies, you don't have to worry about like a classification issue. It does depend if you're getting some DoD information, perhaps. But for the most part, if you're really working off commercial cyber threat intel and what's available open source is completely unclassified, then I think you would just want to ensure that the third party is getting information that's relevant to them, right? So your organization may have a broader risk picture than that third-party supplier, for instance. Like they may not face all of the same risks that you do, so you may not want to pass them all of your cyber threat intelligence. You'll want to do some analysis first, because if you make airplanes and your third-party provider is just making the tires for it, they're probably not going to face every single threat necessarily. You need to do some analysis proactively to see. Now, in some cases, the adversary is well aware of who you work with, so they may face more sophisticated threats than they think they face, but that's why you have to do that sort of proactive analysis based on what vertical you're in. Are you in healthcare? Are you in aerospace? Are you in space? So that would kind of also depend. I think it also may depend on the size of the that third party and how sophisticated they are, right? So a lot of the third party companies may not be at defensible architecture yet, right? So you might pass them cyber threat information, and that goes into a special inbox that they call trash, because what am I doing? What's an IOC, right? So again, I think you should be proactive with that, but you want to make sure that you're at least at a defensible level that third party has, and it's going to depend a lot on like what your organization, like what kind of risk. So you're probably going to involve like C-suite and lawyers maybe to help decide some of that.
Yeah, and if that company is part of your supply chain, that's a whole other brief. That's going to take us another hour.
Right,
So.
which we're not allowed to have. I mean, we have a few more minutes if anybody has any other questions.
Would it be too early to speculate on the Baltimore ransomware attack? Is that something?
So the Baltimore ransom attack was probably, they probably used Eternal Blue, which is, I mean, anybody can get that, but also it's patchable. So there's a patch for Eternal Blue. So, I mean, again, a lot of this stuff is, do you have a defensible architecture? And the answer is no. So the answer to Baltimore is no. The answer to every hospital that gets hacked is no. So they don't have policies, they're not patching systems. I mean, some of the APTs that are like, bronze level APTs are still using exploits that we've had patches for years. People just aren't patching their systems, and then it's like, oh my God, these APTs are so sophisticated. No. Some of them, yes. The one that hit you, no. Like, what I need you to do is patch Apache struts, or just not use it and figure out something else, right? I mean, that's what I need you to do, all right? So again, it's that, have you done some of the core cybersecurity basics on your system and actually have patch policies? So anyway, Baltimore, there was a sophisticated tool, Eternal Blue. Ooh, it sounds awesome. Yeah, there's a patch for that.
Another question. How do you, I know this isn't your area of patch management and all that, but what are your thoughts on the Windows patches that come out and how bad they are and how many problems they cause when you install immediately versus waiting a little bit for them to fix their own problems and then patch? And what are your thoughts on balancing that?
I think if everyone switched to Unix or Linux flavor system, for 6 months, the adversaries would have no idea what's happened. So that's my best solution. My mom has an Alienware computer that runs Zorin, so she's good. She doesn't really understand it, but she knows it works better than Windows. So I think, first of all, really to answer your question is, do you have legitimate real asset management of what is publicly facing on the internet? Right? That's the first question, because those are the things that you need to patch first, right? If the adversary can touch something, then that's the thing that's most important that you patch, whether it's Windows or whatever software you have on those externally available systems. So that's really the first answer to your question. Because if the adversary's already in the network, then you're already fighting a losing battle regardless of what you're patching or what version of Windows you're on, right? To be completely honest, if you're worried about patching everyone's computers and I'm in a 10,000 person organization, when the adversary's already in your system, like that's your concern. So we can't always keep them out. So yes, patching is important, but patch that externally facing stuff first and look at all the policies you have for how people remote into your network. Right? That would be my core focus first, is let's make sure that the defense perimeter is defensible and that we are following our policies and patching the things that a threat actor can easily touch. And then, yes, you should patch as soon as you can, but I understand you don't want to break things, right? So I don't have the magic bullet for that, but that would be the best answer I have.
So risk breaking the defense perimeter first if you have to break something.
Yeah, because the biggest thing is what's going to cost you more,
Right.
right? And it's a risk analysis that you're running. So that's basically what you're doing. And I agree with John. Patch your outside stuff first to give them the hardest way to get in, and then you can worry about everything inside the network later.
And you may have a strategy, right? You might not simultaneously patch everything concurrently, but I mean, that would be what I would focus on first. And maybe depending on the size of your organization or how it's set up, you do some first to see, right? But patch whatever is externally facing first would be my core advice there.
Okay. Good thought. Thank you.
We got a few more minutes if there's any other questions. At this point, anything cybersecurity related is game, I think. All right. Thank you guys for coming and sticking around.